Today, we're taking a deep dive into a case that is, without a doubt, one of the most brutal and shocking crimes in Japan's modern history. It's officially known as the concrete-encased high school girl murder case. Its infamy comes not just from the absolute horror of the crime itself, but from the really tough legal and social questions that it left behind.
So, to really get the full picture of this tragedy and its lasting impact, we're going to break it down into 4 parts. We'll start with the life that was lost, then walk through the timeline of the crime, we'll look at the controversial trial that followed, and finally, we'll explore the legacy of outrage it created. Let's begin with Junko Furuta. Before we get into any of the harrowing details, it is so important to remember the person at the very center of this story.
Her name was Junko Furuta, and when her life was taken from her in 1989, she was just 17 years old.
She was a bright and very well-liked high school senior from Misato in Saitama Prefecture. She got great grades, she had this dream of becoming a singer, and she was even working a part-time job to save up money for a graduation trip. By every single account, she was a vibrant young woman with her whole life just waiting to unfold. Now, to understand the perpetrators, we really have to look at their background. The 4 main offenders, they were all teenagers who were involved in organized crime. They were what's known as chimpira. It's a term for these low-level Yakuza affiliates. The thing is, they already had a history of crimes like theft, assault, and even rape, and they operated with this incredibly dangerous belief that they were basically untouchable. We're now going to turn to the timeline of what happened to Junko. I do have to warn you, the details that follow, which are taken from court documents, are extremely disturbing. We're going to present them factually to show how these events progressed.
Junko Furuta was held captive for 41 days. It's a number that's just hard to wrap your head around. It represents a prolonged and truly unimaginable period of suffering.
It began on November 25, 1988. Junko was on her way home from her part-time job when she was abducted. She was taken to a house in Adachi, Tokyo, a house that was owned by the parents of one of her captors. Just 2 days later, they forced her to call her parents and tell them that she'd run away but was safe. This call effectively stopped the police from searching for her. Over the next few weeks, especially after she tried to escape, the abuse escalated horrifically. By late December, her injuries were so severe that she was totally unrecognizable and couldn't even move. Then, on January 4, 1989, she was subjected to a final 2-hour assault that ultimately ended her life.
The path to any kind of justice didn't even begin for months. It was only after 2 of the main perpetrators were arrested for a completely unrelated crime that one of them confessed to Junko's murder. That confession led police to her body on March 29, 1989, and it set the stage for a legal battle that would become deeply, deeply controversial.
Okay, so a really crucial point here in the legal process was the age of the perpetrators. All 4 of them were under 20 years old, which at the time made them juveniles under Japanese law. This meant that their identities were sealed by the courts, and the idea was to protect their potential for rehabilitation. But a magazine called Shukan Bunshun made a really controversial decision to publish their names anyway. They basically argued that the sheer brutality of their actions meant they had forfeited any right to anonymity.
The sentences that the court handed down were, to many people, just shockingly light. The ringleader, Hiroshi Miyano, he ultimately received a 20-year sentence after an appeal. But the others? They were given much shorter sentences, some as low as 5 to 10 years.
And the public reacted with just this immense outrage. They saw these sentences as unbelievably lenient. Now, to understand the court's thinking, you have to look at the legal precedent in Japan. Experts point to something called the Nagayama Standard, which is basically a guideline that makes the death penalty extremely rare for a crime with only a single victim. And this is in sharp contrast to a similar case from that same year where a juvenile who murdered 2 people did receive the death penalty. For so many people, this legal distinction just felt like a profound and terrible injustice.
So, for our final section, we're going to look at the aftermath, because the story, it didn't just stop with the prison sentences. This case left a really deep and lasting scar on Japanese society.
At her funeral, Junko's classmates delivered this incredibly powerful eulogy. It's just a heartbreaking reminder of the hope that her loved ones clung to, the hope that maybe her death could lead to a safer world.
But that hope was, well, it was severely tested. After being released from prison,
3 of the 4 main perpetrators went on to commit more serious crimes. Miyano was arrested for fraud. Ogura was sentenced again, this time for a violent assault. And then in 2018, Minato was arrested for attempted murder. This pattern of reoffending just poured fuel on an already raging fire. You had these lenient sentences, and then on top of that, this clear failure of rehabilitation. It triggered this fierce and, frankly, still ongoing debate in Japan. It called the entire philosophy of their juvenile justice system into question, and it zeroed in on that deep conflict between the goal of rehabilitating young offenders and the need to deliver real justice for such horrific crimes.
And that leaves us with the central, unresolved question of this entire case, one that societies all around the world are still grappling with. When juvenile criminals commit crimes of this magnitude, where does society draw that line between rehabilitation and retribution? It's a question with no easy answer, but it's one that Junko Furuta's story forces every one of us to confront.